cave paintings as we know them, animal figures, etc. And there's one particular image, the common image you'll get in these situations, of a human outline of a human hand. Not a print, but an outline. And she imagines a drama having taken place 32,000 years ago, where very early human goes into the darkness. If you have the Kinkelleri thing taking place in the open air, we go into the cave, into the darkness, into the most frightening place, back into that darkness, out of the world. And we imagine that person would have some light, so we imagine maybe they have a torch in one hand, a burning brand, something on fire, to produce their own light. We imagine them going into this darkness and going as far as they can, which is the cave wall, to the limit, the cold, the darkest limit, and putting their hand against the cave wall, and already establishing a distance. And she describes a three-act drama. This fantasy is a three-act drama. Act 1, somebody places their hand against the cave wall. Act 2, pigment, remember this hand is holding a torch, is in the mouth, paint is in the mouth, and it's blown against the hand, against the surface of the wall. Act 3 of the three acts is the withdrawal of the hand from the wall, leaving behind a trace of, if you will, that performer's absence. They are no longer there. And it's a three-act image-making gesture in which the performer who has made the image has now become the spectator of their own absence. They are no longer there. I think of this like the Kinkelleri thing, it's like it's another sort of dramatizing, if you will, of mortality. And as Monzan will say, what goes on here is that through this image-making gesture, a couple of things happen. One, the spectator, as such, is born. As soon as the image-making gesture has taken place, and there is now a trace of the fact that somebody was there, there is now a spectator who can never again be in the place of the performer. And as soon as there is a spectator, then, she says, hitting the high notes, humanity has come onto the stage. Literally, humanity has entered history. And the human entering history happens again and again and again, every time a spectator is reborn to re-encounter this trace that has been left behind. A further sort of note on this is, it seems to me that this is a certain sort of theatre which doesn't come to mind. It's not so much a return, but it's something which has to be deliberately remembered. One has to, if you will, construct a theatrical fantasy to tell this story about how the image was made, because that's not being played out for us anymore. One has to go back deliberately into a certain sort of fictional memory to construct this idea. Okay, so I've got those two examples going on. On the one side, I've got, if you will, an idea of economy, let's say that, which is to do with the cave painting. Because what we've got to visualize is a trace of the hand on the wall. There's an image there. But what we do, as we fantasize theatrically upon it, we construct an invisible image of the act by which that trace was made. And we put these different spaces in relationship to each other. The trace that is still there can still be gone back and seen, we can see reproductions of it, and the act that we can't see, that we have to imagine, which takes a certain sort of image form. On the other side, with the contemporary video work, I think, again, of contingency. And rather than economy, which, if you will, gathers things up, which saves things, which redeems things, the image of contingency, for me, is an image of abandonment. The figure who falls, who abandons their own role in the image, who seems somehow to be abandoned by the space in which they appear, while the world continues to go on about its business. Okay, those are the two examples. I say 2 or 3 ideas, and then I shut up. Is it okay? We're going? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. All right. Okay. I give you 2 ideas, and then a sort of little and this is where it might go. Both of these scenes, it strikes me, are scenes in which, really obviously, there is no talking going on. There's no text, there's no speech here. That we're kind of in the space of the visual, in the space of movement, but there's nothing to be heard, there's nothing being said. But I'm curious about how actually both of these scenes, in some ways, seem to be moving towards a certain sort of speech, or moving towards an idea of speech. In the video work, there's something about how taciturn, how deliberately silent these figures are, which for me raises a question of the possibility of speech. The things, if you will, that these people might say, which they're not saying. The things they might be thinking, which are not articulated. In the cave painting, we link the work of the hand to the work of the mouth. Already that organ of articulation is put to work. And as I start trying to make sense of these images, both of which I plagiarize, I've stolen from other people's work, I find myself in a space of speech, looking to share these things with other people. Again, for me, both of these scenes are scenes of isolation, of solitude, of people being radically alone, one in the darkness, one in the open air. But as I encounter them, as I try to think them through, I find myself in a space of sharing of the image. There's a lovely phrase which Monzan says here, which I like, where she says, "Ghosts speak to us of the shared life of images, not the return of the dead." I'd pitch some of my camp there, of how do we think about the shared life of images, and how does that sharing circulate? Boom. Second of two points around this, sort of moving towards a sort of theoretical thinking around this material. These are both, let's say, image-making gestures, the falling over in response to a camera and an instruction, or going into the cave and leaving the image. They're both image-making gestures, but in all sorts of ways, maybe they are not quite theatres. Oh, in some ways, obviously they're not theatres. One is a video work, the other one is something that someone does in a cave and someone constructs a fantasy over it. And I'm thinking, why, for me, interestingly, might they not be quite theatres? And I suggest this. Because the spectator doesn't have to be punctual. In English, what that word means is like being punctual is turning up on time. I mean, literally, in an audience, we start this gig late because the audience isn't here on time. Yeah, they're not punctual. Yeah? The spectator who comes to the cave comes later, comes after the image-making gesture has been made. Kinkeleri's work will always be exhibited in something like a video installation, often in public spaces. And whatever spectator comes to it is coming to it after the event. It is a recording of something that has happened before. So in relationship to these works, we've got a certain sort of non-punctual spectator. Okay, I'm coming to a conclusion here. So, I really want to write and think about theatre. And theatre is my leading word. Go back to that little Husserl phrase. Why is he talking about the illuminated theatre? What is it that the theatre enables and does? What are modes of thinking and doing which are specific to theatre? Not thinking about the theatre, but how does theatre itself think? How does it do its thinking? So I say to myself, okay, what does it mean to think of the theatre spectator as punctual? Because in a whole bunch of ordinary ways, we think of that's what the theatre spectator is. You have to turn up on time, be there when it's happening. And I want to just sort of unpick that a little bit. And I'll unpick it with some very, very simplified words from a contemporary philosopher. But before I do, one way of thinking about the punctuality of the spectator, I was talking about this at another event in London recently. A classical painting which has a scene in it, let's imagine it's a mythological scene where there's an action that's being depicted. It might use a certain sort of visual perspective, but you could also say it uses, I'm saying today anyway, I'm saying on the plane when I wrote these notes, uses a certain sort of temporal perspective. It is from the point of view of a spectator who happened to be there punctually at the time when the scene that is being represented was taking place. Not so much an image of what it was like just after, but here it is. One is punctual to the scene. In the theatre, I think there's a possibility of a